So you've got a product or service to sell, or you're looking to build authority as a thought leader, and you want to get on podcasts as a guest to get in front of your target audience. It's a good move. Podcasts are one of the fastest growing channels right now, and they're great for gaining exposure because you have the opportunity to really build a rapport with listeners over the course of an episode. But how do you find the right podcasts? And then how do you pitch them? Rapport.com is a database containing millions of podcasts designed to save you time finding and pitching the right shows. We have a free trial available, so you can give it a go, but even if you don't use Rapport, you should follow these 4 simple steps to get on podcasts as a guest. You can find all the links in the video description below, so let's get going. Step 1, search for the right podcasts in your niche. Let's say you have a new book to promote that's about nutrition for cyclists. You need to find shows with a relevant audience that are going to be interested in what you have to say. One of the ways to find suitable podcasts to be a guest on is to Google cycling podcasts or open Spotify or Apple Podcasts and search for your keyword and see what comes up. See if it's still publishing new episodes by looking at the dates of recent episodes and check if they accept guests by looking through the show notes or their website. To find relevant shows with Rapport, enter your keyword in the search bar and hit enter. Select the filter active to only see shows that have published a new episode in the last 45 days, and then select guests or interviews to only see shows that we think are most likely to be accepting guests. There are lots of other filters you might want to use to narrow down your search even further. Listener numbers are particularly helpful because if you haven't yet built up a reputation in your industry, you can start at the lower end. If you're well known, you can consider bigger shows. Now, let's say you already have a show in mind that you think is a good fit for you. Here, I found a promising show called Faster Cycling. You can use Rapport's free graph tool to find other podcasts that share a similar audience. You can see the clusters and connections and then dive deeper, perhaps finding guesting opportunities that you might not have thought about before. It's a good idea to not just stick to the obvious when it comes to finding podcasts to be a guest on. It all depends on the angle you can spin. Let's take another example. Let's say, you've created an app that helps people learn how to dance salsa. You don't need to necessarily stick to podcasts about dancing or salsa. You could get featured on mental health shows and talk about the benefits of dancing for your mental health. Or you could get on an entrepreneurship show and talk about the process of building your business. There are tons of opportunities. You could have a think about what your goals are and then think a little outside the box, which Rapport's graph tool will help you with. Step 2, check the podcast stats to make sure it's worth reaching out to. You want to gauge listener numbers, engagement, social reach, the gender skew of the audience, chart rankings, and more. If the podcast has a website, take a look to see if it has a guesting page or media kit. It might provide listener numbers, average ratings, or chart rankings. But the chances are that you'll need to email them asking for more information about the podcast performance and audience. If they email you back, you may find that it's just not a good match for you, and you've wasted a bit of your time. With Rapport, it's really easy to qualify a show because all of that data is accessible in one place. You might have already used the filters for some of these, but if not, you will want to check listener numbers, we already talked about that, engagement score, you want to get in front of an engaged audience. Audience location. If your target audience is based in the US, there's no point in getting interviewed on a show with a primarily Australian audience. Social reach. Podcasts tend to repurpose episodes for social media, so it's another way to boost your exposure. Ratings and reviews. See what people are saying about the show. Do they like it? Gender skew. Again, make sure it matches your target audience. Chart rankings. It's another gauge of popularity. Step 3. Listen to some episodes. Now, you need to make sure that the show is actually a good fit. It may look good on paper, but in reality, you might not gel with it. You can listen by heading to a podcast app like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if they have a website, they may list an RSS feed on there. You can also listen directly within the Rapport app. When you're listening, ask yourself these questions. Do you like this show's interview style? Does it have decent audio quality? And is it professionally produced? Does it feel like you'd fit in with the podcast hosts? Is the podcast relevant to you and your niche? Also, listen for ideas that resonate for you and note down the episode number, as you'll use these later to personalize your outreach email. If the show is a good match, add it to the target list in Rapport by hitting Add to List. Then create a new list and give it a name. You can then add other shows to this list and keep track of where you are in the guest booking process with them. Step 4. Get the contact info and pitch the host. You can search for contacts on Google, or if the podcast has a website, you can use a tool like Hunter to find email addresses. In Raphonic, we have email addresses available for almost every show, and if you can't see what you're looking for, you can ask our concierge team to find better contacts on your behalf. Next, it's time to draft your pitch. If you're good with words, you can do this yourself. If you're not, you can use one of Raphonic's templates that's specific to pitching a show as a guest. Hosts can smell a generic pitch a mile away, so make sure you don't just copy-paste one after the other. There are 5 things to think about when drafting your pitch. First, show how you can add value to the podcast. What can you bring to the table that hasn't been done before? This is where you give your idea for a unique angle you could cover and demonstrate why listeners would be interested. Second, make sure you personalize each pitch using the notes you made earlier about what you liked about a certain episode and why. Next, get to the point. Podcast hosts are often busy people, so once you've drafted your pitch, go back through and try to trim it by at least a quarter. Fourth, use a straightforward subject line. You need to grab their attention, but this isn't the time for clever puns or wordplay. Podcast guest pitch followed by your angle could do the job pretty well. Finally, think about creating a podcast one-sheet separate to your email that contains a lot more information about you so hosts can get to know you better. Once you've sent your pitch, if you don't hear back from them within a few days, send a follow-up. You can also try to ping one of their social media accounts. I've linked to our full guide on how to pitch a podcast in the video description below if you want more details about each of these tips. So you now know how to get the most out of podcast guesting. If you're ready to take the next step and start looking for suitable podcasts, head to raphonic.com and give it a try for free. It will save you tons of time and help you maximize the impact from your appearances. Catch you again soon.